Hello guys and welcome to Europe in Detail. We're going to start today's episode with a really cool build. There's this old stone wall that runs around the edge of the town pretty spectacularly, and we're going to use a combination of stone assets and a little bit of creativity and try and build this around our town within game. Originally, I wasn't going to do this until later in the build, but stuff it. I'm looking forward to it. This sort of thing I really enjoy building, and there really isn't any reason why I can't build this now. I don't need to change it in future or anything like that. It's sort of going to be where it's going to be, and it kind of makes sense a little bit to build it first, because then I can build up to it nice and snug. So I've quickly used a terraforming network to get rid of the terrain right up to the road's edge, because that's where we're going to put the wall. And then, oh my god, trying to pick the right stone for this was really difficult. Some props looked good and then I blew them up with procedural objects and they looked crap. Others, the colour wasn't quite right or whatever. Nothing was really working, and I was seriously thinking about changing the plan altogether. But in the end, I found a set of stone walls and arches that were perfect. The texture, the colour, really bang on. I guess I'm just being a little bit more fussy in this town in regards to good textures and realistic looking objects in general than maybe I have in the past towns. And with these walls here in particular, I know that they have to be a yellowish stone. They're also going to be super visible, so it's pretty important to get them right. You can see here it's also got these arches in it that are going to end up running underneath our road. We're not going to have them leading anywhere particular, but I do want them to show some sort of cavity underneath the road. I used procedural objects to line that arch up really nicely with what we've built so far, and I'm trying to match them all up so that the concrete and stone edges meet really neatly, but the walls aren't necessarily square or at any particular angle. I guess I'm just trying to make them sort of look organic. You'll notice that we've skipped a section and there's a bit of wall that it looks like we've missed. We're going to come back to this soon. We're going to carry on the wall here, and it's a little bit shorter because the road's going downhill this way. And for now, I'm just going to put a straight wall in here, but we're going to come back and do something cool real soon. So going back to this section I missed out, you can see here in real life there's a bit where these buildings look like they're built over the wall and there's a section missing. This just looks way too cool and organic and natural for me to miss, so we're going to try and build this in game. To be able to place buildings out here without messing up that terrain, they have to be switched to procedural objects. They also look to be predominantly those orangey pastel buildings, so they're the ones we're going to use. Now, it was really tempting to detail these up, but I'm going to leave that for a later episode because I think I've jumped the gun even putting these in, but I sort of felt like I had to finish this wall off. So all I'm going to do with these buildings at this point is get them in and then put fake cliffs and stuff around them so that they look set in place for now. But I've got to say, I love the way it looks up against our wall. This is the last thing I would have thought to have built here. So let's pop back to that last section of wall that we put up, and we're going to put a couple of arches in here, 3 all up in fact. Now I know at least 2 of these are following that real life model, but I decided to add a third one in because they just look so darn cool. So with procedural objects we get those into place, and they look really cool. As you can see though, they take a lot of work with procedural objects, and I know there's a few roads on the workshop that come with arches by default, and I did flirt with the idea of using those, but using procedural objects gives me way more control, and I can put the arches in so that they're not even, they're in places where you kind of wouldn't expect them. But I think that's pretty important, at least for the vibe that I'm going for, so I've just got to suck it up and do it with procedural objects. So there may end up being a little bit more of that wall that we build in future, but that's enough for now, and we're going to finish this off with a little bit of bush and overgrowth around the place. This is gonna hopefully help it make it look like it's really aged. And I also scatter a few trees around on that lower level. I'm not sure why, because I know I'm gonna come back and do this in a future episode, but I still do it. And with that, guys, we have completed this little medieval wall, and I think it looks really good. This bit here is where we start to differ from the real life model a little wee bit. I'm not sure why, but I've decided to put a car park in here. Obviously, with our little wee town being lots and lots of pedestrian only areas, we're going to need some pretty efficient car parks. Now, I'm not sold on why I've done a car park here, because it's a really sort of predominant area. You can see that it looks like it's been built up for something more important than a car park. So with that said, I am definitely not sold on it. Let's pretend for a sec that there was a really historic, beautiful building here and it fell apart or something, and it's just a car park for now until they rebuild something awesome. Yeah, that'll do. So looking at Google Earth, I noticed this really cool bit on the outside of the retaining wall, or that wall that we built at the start of the episode. It looked like there was a stone archway suspended above some rock. And it kind of looked like the buildings and the archway were carved out of the rock. And that was just another really cool thing that I could just not build. So I start by putting the archway down. I'm using the same one we used in the wall. And then next was to try and match in a stone building to as close to that texture as I could. And this is where things started to get really tricky, because I needed it to match really closely. In order to pull this off, it needs to all look like it's carved out of the same material. So in the end, I used the same prop that I have for the wall, and I just blew it up really wide and made it look like a building. And I just come back and sort of put my own prop windows in it. To finish this off, I've decided to use one of Grey Flame's rocks, try and match it to the colour and texture that we've used for the rest of the building, and then very carefully place them underneath what we've built so far. I'm really happy with this wall. I think it's turned out great, and with that done, I'm pretty desperate now to see what it looks like with the buildings right up against it. So let's not bugger around, we're going to do one of those blocks right now. The first thing I want to do is put some pedestrian paths down. We're going to work around these very closely. You'll also notice that there's a road running up here as well. This gives access to the houses for the citizens that live and work in the area. And in terms of the buildings, it's more of those pastel coloured terracotta roofed homes. So as you can see, it is still predominantly pedestrian only, like most of the towns we've visited in this series, but I am excited to work with roads. Even though they're small dead end roads, these are going to be really alive, these areas, when we get to them. There's a bit more room in these areas, they're a bit more easily accessible, so yeah, I can't wait to get down there and start detailing those areas. So what could we expect to see down at ground level? There's lots of fences covered in flowers and vegetation, practical things like bollards where they're needed. Also, maybe some of the older buildings and structures in the area have heaps of vines and overgrowth on them as well. I'm also seeing lots of stone, whether that's decals or walls. So I'm sure to add a few stone walls and decals in here as well. Then I'll finish this area off with some signage. There is lots and lots of pedestrian paths and walkways that need detailing that have been built so far, but there's going to be even more in future. And I'm just not going to be able to show you guys all of them and all of the detailing, so I'm going to pick the coolest spots and detail the heck out of them. So far, most of the coolest spots have been spots like this where two paths have met at like a T intersection. I'm going to try and really bring these areas to life with different shops and things going on. I'm thinking in future these areas might be good for like statues and fountains. Maybe there's street performers or buskers, or maybe there's just really interesting or cool shops nearby. I also want to try and focus on making each shop individual, at least the shop frontage. So some may have a nice iron handrail out the front that's covered in flowers, others just may have a little wee door with a small awning above it and nothing else, and maybe some are like gift shops or pottery shops that have some sort of display out the front. Now, I mentioned in the last episode that I wanted to back off on these sorts of props like restaurants and things like that, and I definitely am going to do that, but there's still got to be a certain amount if I want to pull this off correctly. We can't just have lifeless pedestrian streets with nothing going on. I kind of think that without at least some props, it's just going to look like they're walking around some sort of ruined old town that's been abandoned. It's got to feel warm and inviting and lived in. So what you can see me doing now is I'm trying to add some decals into these alleyways to mimic these drains that we've got running around the place in real life. These paths just slope into the middle into a natural drain and then drain into these like overflows or storm water drains every now and then. It's quite a big part of the aesthetic, at least on the ground, so I'm going to try and nail this in game. I normally steer clear of using procedural objects with decals because it's very tedious, but I've got no other way to pull this off, not that I can think of. So I make a brick decal really skinny so it looks like sort of 3 or 4 bricks wide, and then just place that down the middle of our alleyways. Where they meet at a T intersection is generally where I'll put a drain decal. Then I'll finish the area off with bits of grass growing up through the cracks in the concrete and things like that. I just want to mention real quick while I remember, the ground texture or the pavement texture that I've got with Surface Painter is a default cobblestone. You've probably already noticed that, but I'm going to point it out anyway. I've decided to do this because it saves me putting decals everywhere. And I'm going to finish off the detailing in this area with a little wee French cafe I found on the workshop, but I'm going to make my own facade. I've got a really nice old broken tile wall prop, and I'm going to use that to go right around the building and make this look really old. It's quite amazing how adding a few more buildings can change the whole look of the town, and this has really spurred me on to add more buildings in. It's really starting to look like something now. I really enjoy the fact that every place we've visited so far in the series has been different, and France now is really starting to come into its own. So let's add some more buildings in. I've left this open courtyard right on the edge of one of the pedestrian paths. I want to zoom in here and make this a bit of a feature. Maybe the stone building here is an old church or something, but I want to detail out the front of it, put some nice steps in, a nice entrance. You can't tell too much from this camera angle, but there's actually quite a bit of elevation to work with here as well, so we've got to get some steps in and some false surfaces to make it look like these back homes and buildings have access. Then I want to cover it in overgrowth and make it look really, really old. Speaking of churches, I have missed a very, very prominent one that sits right above our little wee stream that we built in the last episode. And this is just magnificent, so we're going to clear a bit of room and build this in game. Now this is most certainly not like for like. I'm getting this as close to the river as I can. I've sort of stymied myself with room here. I didn't build this originally, so I've got to retrofit this in. The first thing I need to do is create a flat area, and some of the terrain is flat here, but I mostly use surfaces. We'll get a nice stone decal down on that and then put in some of the planters and trees around it nice and early. Then the crowning glory. I found this really cool stone prop church, and all I do is turn it to procedural objects and make the tower a bit bigger. We got some pretty important and cool things built in this episode, and you guys might be pleased to know I've already recorded the 3rd episode of France, and wowee, I am so excited to show you guys what we built next. I also changed the LUT, and we'll talk about that in the next episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. Give us a thumbs up if you've really enjoyed it. If you don't subscribe, you could consider that. That'd be awesome. Please take care of yourselves, guys, and I will see you on the next episode. Bye.